Today I will be covering the top 8 decks from the third Mythic Championship. Before I get started, I have to quickly mention the lack of Sultai/Sultai Dreadhorde decks from this event. The deck is still decent and will work for you on the MTG Arena ladder. If you look at the SCG, Sultai/Sultai Dreadhorde is usually one of the most common decks. It also had a top 2 showing in a recent SCG. Meanwhile, Red Deck Wins has seen almost no play in the SCG, apart from that 1 week where there were 3 Red Deck Wins in the SCG top 8, before it vanished once more. Despite the fact that the deck is quite good in the current meta. Of course, it has a major drawback. If there is an Explore package on the opposite side and it gets going, you kinda auto lose. You could argue that because the SCG sees so many decks with the Explore package, people are afraid to bring Red Deck Wins just because you can so easily lose a game to Explore if they get a good start. Anyway, what I want to highlight is that there are other functional decks to bring to your own MTG Arena ladder experience, and only going after the latest winning deck in a large tournament would not necessarily bring you the best result. For example, Mass Manipulation decks still has a decent showing in the SCG, even though I tend to rank it as a tier 1.5 deck. And of course, don't forget that these decks are made for best of 3s with sideboards in mind. Meanwhile, in MTG Arena best of 1, you can bring your Merfolk deck and go quite far due to the nature of best of 1. Anyway, let's get started with the third Mythic Championship top 8 list. On the 8th and on the 7th place, we find Esper Control, or as I would like to call them, what are you actually trying to do? These two decks are so similar that I will be covering them together. However, I will point out the important differences between the decks. The 7th placed control deck features 2 Bolas Citadel in the main board. To be honest with you, I can't really try to justify as to why you would want to include this card. Yes, I can give you some ideas of perfect situations for when this card could be playable, such as Narset, a long game versus hero decks with little damage being done early on. But even so, it is asking for quite a lot of things to go right in order to justify its place in the deck. The other large difference between the decks is the 2 Search for Azcanta being in the main board for the 8th place control deck, while being in the sideboard for the Bolas Citadel deck. Otherwise, there is not that much to talk about. You have your standard control decks, such as they are in our current standard, with tons of board removals, spot removals, some draw power, Thought Erasure, also known as one of the best cards in standard at the moment, and of course Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, as your win con, with support from Teferi, Time Reveler, and Narset. Honestly, I would not recommend that you went out of your way to make these kind of Esper control decks. They are just lacking so much. The lack of enchantment removal makes me go, what are you doing? Especially with how strong enchantments are in our current standard. And as a experienced Magic control player and a Jace the Mind Sculptor abuser, the lack of counterspells makes me quite sad. Especially considering how important big costly spells are at the moment. And of course the total lack of Dovin's Veto makes me go, what are you actually doing? Especially considering most hero decks only run at most 2 Dovin's Veto themselves. Seriously, either start playing like real control decks again, you know, the type that bores Twitch chat to tears, and have the commentators talking about anything that isn't Magic, or don't ever talk to me or my son ever again. Anyway, let's move on to the 6th place deck, and here we got Azura's Aggro, or as I would like to call it, mono white with a tiny splash of blue for the blue cards in the sideboard, namely DOD, 1 Teferi Time Reveler, and 1 Disdainful Stroke. We have seen this deck quite a lot during Ravnica Allegiances, and before that as just mono white during the time of Colgaria. And honestly, it hasn't changed that much over the year, nor has my opinion on the deck either, which is that the deck is okay. It's not quite tier 1 in every meta, but it is a solid tier 1.5. And if you're planning to bring it to MTG Arena best of ones, just remove the blue cards and the blue lands and you're good to go. Oh, and with this event, Gideon Blackblade has finally seen some play in top 8, from the sideboard in this case. Let's move on to place number 5, and here we got a Phoenix deck. I'm not quite sure why this page is calling it You Are Aggro, but regardless, this deck has not seen that much play in the competitive scene for some time. The deck is still good for MTG Arena ladder, however, just as with Red Deck wins, it has not been very popular in the SCG. One of the biggest hindrances when it comes to the SCG is of course the large number of Explore packages with Dreadhorde that has been played in it. As a result, making aggro decks very feast or famine, with skill having very low part of the game. Of course, the Phoenix deck is not known for its skill requirement either. Spam cheap cards, play some drakes, bring back a few birds, and hopefully you win. Anyway, there's not that much to talk about that has not been said about the Phoenix deck, nor is it hard to understand how the deck plays, and the cards that make up the deck are usually quite similar, with some personal choices for some of the 1-drops. Regardless, I can still recommend the deck if you want to bring it to the MTG Arena ladder. But if you're not a more casual player, the deck might bore you quite quickly if you're not looking for a deck to grind the ladder with. Especially among friends, don't bring the Phoenix decks to a friendly competition, that would be sad. On the 4th place, we have Red Deck Wins, the deck that you could give to a Spider Monkey and watch the monkey win with. There is really not that much to talk about here. The deck is just as it has been for the past couple of months, still an excellent deck, still a proper tier 1 deck, and of course a really cheap deck to make. But before we look at number 3, it is time for the Chandra and Banefire rant. To keep it short, there are 2 camps of thoughts on Chandra. Camp 1, Chandra is good in mono red. Camp 2, Chandra is awful in mono red and makes the deck slower while trying to play a bit for the late game versus proper late game decks because reasons. I think you can tell which camp I'm in quite easily. And to just highlight my issues with Chandra, have a quick look at the screenshot during one of the games. The mono red had a really good start and I was quite hopeful for it. Then the mono red player drew a Chandra after already having 2 experimental friends in his hand, at which point I just went, well, this is over, and went back to the CSGO stream. I do recognize that Chandra gives red some draw power, but she offers no true burst damage early on, and of course if you are going to try to play Experimental Frenzy as well, you could have turns where you do nothing for up to 2 turns in the early game and just watch your opponent play Commander Dreadhorde, play 2 Planeswalkers that you now have to deal with, and hope that you draw the right cards in order to actually deal with them, and if you don't, you just straight up lose. And because you didn't play any pressure because you played a Chandra and then an Experimental Frenzy, or you only played a Chandra and didn't find anything, you also kinda lose the game. I just don't think she is worth it. Oh, and for some reason, a Red Deck Wins choose to go with Chandra, but not include a single copy of Banefire anywhere, because having Banefire that can win you a late game is not good. I don't quite get the thought behind not including a Banefire, at least one. Seriously, if you're looking to play Red Deck Wins on the ladder, include one Banefire somewhere, regardless if you're playing best of 1 or best of 3. Let's move on to the 3rd place and the 2nd place, because here we have 2 Esper superhero decks. These 2 decks are just as similar as the 2 control decks were on place 8 and 7, with Kai's superhero deck opting for 1 Ujin, while Brad Nelson opting for a single copy of Modify. I would like to thank Brad for reminding people that Mortify is a thing. Anyway, the sideboards are actually 100% the same, and apart from Ujin and Modify, so are the rest of the decks, including the lands. Anyway, regarding Esper Superheroes, the deck is still just as good as it has been in the SCG, and it is quite a safe choice when it comes to best of threes. Meanwhile, the hype for Command Dreadhorde has died down quite a bit, and the card now finds itself as a 1-2 off in most decks that are utilizing black mana. I can't really say anything that I've not said in previous SCG top 8 deck lists. The deck is just a solid tier 1 deck that I can certainly recommend that you craft if you have the wildcard for it. Of course, mono red is much cheaper for beginners and is just as capable on the MTG Arena ladder in the best of ones. And on the first place, we have Nexus of Fate. The deck has not evolved that much since the last time we saw it in the SCG. There is a single Nissa in the main board as another win con for the deck once it gets going, and of course there are 3 Ooze waiting in the sideboard that comes in as needed. The one interesting thing that I can talk about is Blast Zone. It is just such an amazing card, and of course with the seemingly endless mana of the Nexus of Fate deck, it will allow the Nexus of Fate deck to deal with almost anything in our standard. And of course with Crushing Canopy in the sideboard, there are ways to deal with enchantments as well. One of the best moments for Blast Zone was versus Reddeck Wins, where it was able to clear the board and leave the Reddeck Win player with a very small chance to actually win the game because there was nothing really left in his hand. However, I can't recommend that you craft this deck if you're looking to bring it to MTG Arena. For one thing, it is banned in best of ones in MTG Arena, so you couldn't play it in BO1s even if you wanted to. And secondly, would you be as foolish to bring the deck to best of threes and you're not at the very top of the ladder, don't be surprised if you get roped quite a bit to a point where you no longer want to play the deck. Of course, no one wants to play against Nexus of Fate either, so I guess the deck is perfect for trolls and sociopaths. Anyway, let's conclude this video. The event itself was quite good, although sometimes the forced narratives and storylines was really annoying. Kinda like League of Legends and their forced storylines, also known as really annoying and thank you for the mute option. In comparison, the SCG events are much better, with the casters having a lot more room to spread out and are not forcing storylines on you. Of course, the SCG events are played with the physical cards and without the somewhat lacking MTG Arena UI. Speaking of the UI, I found myself really hating how they had it set up for this event, plus being forced to follow a player's every move gets quite annoying, especially when you watch someone recheck the graveyard for the 5th time. But this is more a personal issue I have with the Mythic event compared to the SCG. When it comes to where the decks are currently standing on my recommendation list, we have the following: Tier 1, Sultai Dreadhorde, Esper Superheroes, and Reddeck Wins, same as the last SCG recommendation. In Tier 1.5, we have Mono White, Mass Manipulation, Tokens, and Phoenix decks, just as before. And in Tier 2, we have Esper Control. Don't play something else. You will have more success. And of course, I can't actually recommend that you make a Nexus of Fate deck for MTG Arena, because, you know, of all the issues. Anyway, that will conclude this video. Let me know if there is something else you want me to cover, apart from the top 8 lists, the deck reviews, and the crafting guides. As always, I am Project, and I will catch you next time.